In Eregion, the craftsmen of the Gwaith y Myrdain, the people of the jewelsmiths, surpassed in cunning all that have ever wrought, save only Feanor himself. And indeed greatest in skill among them was Celebrimbor, son of Curufin. We meet Celebrimbor, and immediately the shadow of Feanor is present. Feanor, the spirit of fire, the brightest flame the Noldor ever produced. His genius was so great that it reshaped the fate of the Noldor, the elves as a whole, and Middle-earth. Yet his brilliance burned those nearest to him, and his fire would still burn Middle-earth in its second age. His legacy leaves him as a figure both famous and infamous, and it's a legacy carried by Celebrimbor more than any other. Some readers may know Feanor best as one who swore a dreadful oath of vengeance, as the leader of the Noldor rebellion, or enemy of the fallen Vala Melkor, whom he named Morgoth, the Black Foe. But Feanor is best known by most for his creations, specifically the Silmarils, arguably one of the greatest acts of subcreation in Arda's long history. Tolkien uses the term subcreation to describe art and craft that work with the world's given nature, in contrast to acts of making that seek to bend others to the maker's will, which becomes domination. Feanor's creations do not exist as mere objects, but expressions of his unique will. They are beauty as possession, art as identity. And from his great flame would come another, a quieter fire but no less bright, Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor is not simply a descendant of Feanor. He is the inheritor of what I see as an unanswered question left behind by Feanor's time in the world. Can great and legendary craft be used for all, for healing? Or is such brilliance doomed to possessiveness, domination, and grief? Welcome back to my exploration of Tolkien's Rings of Power. In my video, How Eregion Forged the Rings of Power, I focused on Middle-earth following the defeat of Morgoth. The desire to renew and maintain was shared by both the elves in their founding of the realm of Eregion, and Morgoth's servant, Sauron, in his growing desire to dominate and shape Middle-earth to his will. I explored the arrival of Sauron as Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, to Eregion, his ability to sway the hearts and minds of the jewelsmiths of Ostinithil, the forging of rings of power, and the inevitable turn to violence and bloodshed when Sauron's deepest desires became known to Celebrimbor and the elves. In this video, I focus on Celebrimbor as a figure, the sources of his great lineage, the importance of Annatar's instruction, the counterwork of the Three Rings, the inheritance of gifts and legacy from Feanor, and the attempt to answer questions such as, can the fire of creation left by Feanor be redeemed? What does Tolkien's making Celebrimbor, the grandson of Feanor, tell us about Celebrimbor's motivations and character? This video is arguably as much about Feanor as it is Celebrimbor, because to understand the latter, we must understand both what he inherits from the former, what he rejects, and how each figure is used to connect two ages of Middle-earth. Celebrimbor is a deceptively complex character, in part because Tolkien did not leave a single fixed account of him. Instead, his story survives across several texts: the Silmarillion, unfinished tales, and Tolkien's late notes in Volume 12 of the History of Middle-earth. These variations will matter for context, but here I simply recognise that Celebrimbor is a figure whose biography is layered and intentionally reframed across time. In the chapters to come, I will look first at Celebrimbor's place within the House of Feanor, not only in terms of genealogy, but in how Tolkien uses that lineage to explore whether the fire of creation can be guided towards stewardship rather than possession. This full discussion appears when I examine vocation, inheritance, and divergence. I will then turn to Annatar's arrival and instruction, and why the offer of collaboration felt both reasonable and morally justified at the time. This is explored in my discussion on the temptation of good ends, and when it becomes the central pressure, what one may attempt to do to justify good ends. From there I consider what I call the counterwork of the three rings, the closest Celebrimbor comes to redeeming Feanor's flame without repeating his fall. Their ethical intention will be addressed, but their structural dependence on the one is explored in the video of this series, which is dedicated entirely to the three rings. Finally, I will follow Celebrimbor through the unmasking of Annatar in the fall of Eregion, into the legacy that survives him. A legacy that I believe deviates from lineage into the realm of wisdom. The guiding question remains the same: can the fire of creation be redeemed? Before any sort of real analysis or interpretation can take place, I think the first question I answer should be, what did Tolkien actually write? The life of Celebrimbor is scattered, layered, and in places contradictory. I'd like to just establish which texts I will be following, and how each source can build on the previous to give us an even greater picture of this important figure. The primary narrative, or tradition, comes from the Silmarillion, specifically the fifth part of that book, of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Here, Celebrimbor is the head of the Gwaith y Myrdain in Eregion, the heart of elven craft near Khazad-dûm in the Second Age. The arrival of Sauron as Annatar leads to cooperation and the forging of 16 Great Rings of Power. Celebrimbor forges the three rings alone, and when the one ring is forged, the elves perceive the deception and intention of Sauron, removing the rings. This leads to the war of the elves and Sauron, with the fall of Eregion and Celebrimbor's capture, torture, and death. From that time, war never ceased between Sauron and the elves, and Eregion was laid waste, and Celebrimbor was slain, and the doors of Moria were shut. Unfinished Tales, instead of contradicting what was written in the Silmarillion, enhances what was written. It was here that we learn that Annatar claimed to be an emissary of the Valar themselves, and as I explained in how Eregion forged the Rings of Power, this was well within the capabilities of Sauron, as he was a Maya, and once did serve the Valar Aule. Sauron did know of arcane arts and knowledge beyond the knowledge of these elves, and expertly shielded his malicious intentions through his honesty of the gifts he could and would share, while dishonestly withholding how this would benefit him directly. In Eregion, Sauron posed as an emissary of the Valar, sent by them to Middle-earth, thus anticipating the Istari, or ordered by them to remain there to give aid to the elves. Galadriel is not really mentioned at all in dealings with Annatar in the Silmarillion, but her involvement dramatically increased as the skeptic. If something seems too good to be true, perhaps it is. Also, the Guild of Celebrimbor is still receptive, but differences of opinion between them and Galadriel and Celeborn lead to political tensions within Eregion. Finally, the three rings are a point of discussion following the betrayal of Sauron, with counsel given to hide and disperse them. In the Silmarillion, we are merely told that the wise held them and that Sauron greatly desired them. Even with the greater role of Galadriel in the story, nothing here negates the Silmarillion, and instead deepens the tale. The deception of Annatar is enhanced by his claim to be sent by the powers. Political intrigue breaks apart the harmony of Eregion, showing Sauron's presence and behaviour poisons everything around him. And the three rings' importance is embellished further, with counsel taken to decide their fate, and Sauron's intense desire to obtain them. It is when reading Tolkien's very late writings that a radical variant is encountered. In this late tradition, Celebrimbor is no longer the grandson of Feanor. In fact, he's not Fëanorian at all. He is a Cinda of Beleriand, specifically a descendant of the minstrel Daeron of Doriath. Quite the departure. This means that over the course of Tolkien's writings, Celebrimbor was described as a Naldo, Teler, and Cinda, a mixed history of various traditions that could rival even Gil-galad and the question of his parentage. Celebrimbor still plays his great role in Eregion, but his influence includes the use of the ancient runic alphabet of Dairon, no doubt due to Celebrimbor's influence as one claiming descent from the great minstrel, one who did rival Feanor, but in the development of writing systems. Feanor being the inventor of Tengwar, and Dairon invented runes that he would later improve with the Certhas Dairon. This, interestingly, gives Celebrimbor some form of legacy to live up to, both traditions, Feanor and Dairon, both legendary and influential figures in the history of the Firstborn. Yet as a descendant of Dairon, it negates the thematic link to Feanor. No inherited fire, no genealogical burden due to Feanor's downfall, and no echo of the great Silmarils. Those who are familiar with my views on Tolkien's Legendarium know I am very open to traditions, versions, and contradictions. Still, I have to approach this entire series from somewhere, and while I find the late conception of Celebrimbor as a descendant of Dairon fascinating, it is one I won't carry forward throughout this video and others in the series, for several reasons. It erases Fëanorian inheritance, which is central to the theological and aesthetic arc of my entire analysis and interpretation of Celebrimbor and Rings of Power. It breaks what I see as the link or chiasm between the First Age and Second Age, the Silmarils of Feanor, the Three Rings of Celebrimbor. It removes a moral genealogy, the idea that inherited greatness and gifts must be disciplined across generations. It appears as an isolated late note and was never integrated into any wider narrative. Thus, for my interpretation of the figure Celebrimbor, the Silmarillion is the spine, Unfinished Tales emphasises what has been written, and various passages from the peoples of Middle-earth are included as marginalia or excluded entirely. There are many reasons an author may provide family trees. They can serve the story, deepen the history of a world, or reveal something essential about its people. Tolkien, who is jokingly accused of writing endless description of trees, is far more relentless about family trees, and for good reason. Genealogy can feel like dry detail, but not with Tolkien. He uses lineage as a thematic engine, carrying ideas across entire ages of his legendarium. Characters become legible through the lines they inherit, descendants, ancestors, the long arc of a house. As I've already stated, my interpretation of Celebrimbor relies on him being a descendant of Feanor. Tolkien's choice to make Celebrimbor the son of Curufin and the grandson of Feanor is not incidental genealogy, or Tolkien tampering with family trees to make his vast world that bit smaller for no reason. To me, this genealogy is the literary hinge that binds the tragedy of Feanor's Silmarils to the tragedy of the Rings of Power. As I discussed in the very first video in my look at the Rings of Power, their nature and purpose in Tolkien's world, the drama of the Second Age is not simply political, it is the aftershock of the First Age, of the House of Finwë echoing across centuries. By understanding the importance of Celebrimbor as the descendant of Feanor, we can explore inheritance and the possibility of correction and redemption in the art of crafting itself. Feanor's own name given to this his favourite son, because he alone showed in some degree the same temper and talents. He also resembled Feanor very much in face. Tolkien did not go as far as to make Celebrimbor a son of Feanor. This would force Celebrimbor to be a participant in the dreadful oath sworn in vengeance. But I think Tolkien was clever to make Celebrimbor the son of Curufin. The quote provided just shows how similar Curufin was to Feanor. Curufin himself inherits his temper and talents, and even his facial appearance. To have Celebrimbor be the son of Curufin is to add to the burden of inheritance. He is the son of Feanor's favourite son, one of great skill himself. Curufin, the cunning and persuasive son of Feanor, carries the flame of Feanor, and Celebrimbor in turn is the inheritor of the brightest flame among the elves. Celebrimbor has been placed squarely inside the Fëanorian legacy. This allows the preservation of the inheritance of skill, temptation, and possibly the inheritance of the great doom of Curufin, his brothers, and Feanor. Celebrimbor will have choices to make as one born into such a house, and Tolkien has now linked the Rings of Power to the Silmarils, allowing us to ask what it means to create something beautiful and powerful. Can such a thing be free of possessiveness and a fall? Now these were the three that had last been made, and they possessed the greatest powers. Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, they were named, the rings of fire and of water and of air, set with ruby and adamant and sapphire, and of all the elven rings, Sauron most desired to possess them. With the fire of Feanor being passed to Celebrimbor, what they share is certainly not all negative, despite the fate of both figures. Both are unquestioned supreme artisans of the Noldor, the greatest craftsmen of their respective eras and ages. And I would define great as the ability to push their art beyond perceived limits. They are makers whose craft transcends mere utility and enters the realm of what we would consider mythic art or magic. Both figures share a Fëanorian impulse to preserve or crystallize what is beautiful against loss. This is the seed of both genius and peril. Feanor captures light in the Silmarils. Light is the primeval symbol in the nature of the universe. The light of Valinor is the light of art undivorced from reason, so says Tolkien himself. It is good. Celebrimbor captures memory and preservation in his Rings of Power, the desire of elves themselves, the attempt to halt decay and change. Something that was introduced into the world to the sorrow of the firstborn, who would witness great beauty crumble to dust over the ages. And both stand firmly in the crafting lineage of the personification of crafting, the Vala Aule. This ties them to the nature of subcreation and the pitfalls that can arise from using gifts to place desire and will into the world. Aule submitted to the will of his maker, Eru, in the events surrounding the making of dwarves. But Feanor was unable to submit his own act of subcreation to the world. This will be a test for Celebrimbor. Feanor and Celebrimbor believe that the world can be held and not merely perceived. They share a calling to shape the world into vessels of meaning and beauty. I take this as Celebrimbor not merely inheriting a name or lineage, but arguably a project or idea started by his grandfather, one that created the wondrous Silmarils, but led to betrayal, death, and war. Here, the contrast between grandfather and grandson becomes clearest, with the fire of Feanor changing course through Celebrimbor's own actions and creation. Where the Silmarils would draw external beauty inward, focusing Eru's gift of light into objects, Celebrimbor's three rings maintain external beauty in the world. The three Silmarils become symbols of possession and identity, but the three rings are symbols of stewardship and preservation. Where Feanor and his sons bound themselves to the Silmarils through their irrevocable oath, Celebrimbor relinquished his greatest creations to guardians. The Silmarils are light captured, and the three rings are time tended. For Feanor, his Silmarils become extensions of himself and become a very part of his identity. The story of Quenta Silmarillion shows his obsession with the Silmarils, leading to jealousy, the oath, exile, and grief. The Silmarils then represent the idea of beauty that cannot be shared, as the one who created them did not want to share them. Again, they become extensions of Feanor. Celebrimbor's signature act is relinquishment. After forging the three rings, he can give them away for others to protect. Celebrimbor does not let the creation of the three destroy him. He does not grasp at them and desire them for his own. He lets them go. This is an act that was already foreshadowed in Celebrimbor's earlier years, what I see as the breaking of the Fëanorian chain, the doom that would bind that family
to the creation of Feanor, the Silmarils, and vengeance against anyone who stood in their way. There was tumult in Nargothrond, for thither now returned many elves that had been prisoners in the Isle of Sauron, and a clamour arose that no words of Celegorm could still. They lamented bitterly the fall of Felagund their king, saying that a maiden had dared that which the sons of Feanor had not dared to do. But many perceived that it was treachery rather than fear that guided Celegorm and Curufin. As told in the quest for the Silmaril that we can read in chapter 19 of the Silmarillion of Beren and Luthien, Curufin and his brother Celegorm were bound to their oath to claim the Silmarils at any cost. They worked for power in Nargothrond, which led to Finrod being forced to leave the realm and Orodreth holding the crown. They rose in influence and power, but were discovered as schemers and traitors following the reclaiming of Minas Tirith from the clutches of Sauron, when Luthien freed prisoners from Sauron's dungeons. Celegorm and Curufin's political aspirations were now apparent to Orodreth, and both were ordered to leave Nargothrond at once, with there then being little love between Nargothrond and the sons of Feanor thereafter. This was an extremely important moment for Celebrimbor, son Curufin. Both his father and Celegorm left Nargothrond alone. Even their kin, within Nargothrond, could perceive that the curse of Mandos lay heavily upon them, and evil followed them. Celebrimbor refused to acknowledge or accept the actions of his father, as one who was loyal to Nargothrond and of the fallen king who had founded it, Finrod. He was ashamed of what his father had done. I see Celebrimbor's repudiation of Curufin and Nargothrond as a rejection of domination, of manipulation, the possessive logic of the oath that drove the deeds of his father and his father before him. Celebrimbor remaining within Nargothrond as his father rode to the east was Celebrimbor remaining as a son of the house itself, but refusing the doom that had enveloped the house. Therein lies freedom, the ability and desire to change and not succumb. From that act in the First Age, Celebrimbor in the Second Age is a figure who has tried to grow beyond the oath that he was never bound to in the first place. Remember, he never swore it, but was a part of a family overcome by it. Tolkien demonstrates the growth of Celebrimbor through what I'd call the chiasm of light and time, the reverse of Feanor's First Age with Celebrimbor's Second Age. Feanor's First Age has the captured light of the Silmarils representing beauty made finite, the craft of Feanor turned within, eventually ending in grief. Celebrimbor's Second Age has time tended, with beauty made to endure through the three rings. The craft has been turned outward. This does end in preservation, though its existence is still fragile and can be broken. This mirrored narrative shows the House of Feanor moving from the purity of light to ruin through possession. Celebrimbor's attempts see memory move toward preservation through stewardship. So can the fire of creation be redeemed without being extinguished? Celebrimbor in the Second Age is the attempt to say yes, and it is Sauron as Annatar who arrives in the realm of Eregion to test Celebrimbor's answer to the true thematic question. I'd like to expand upon these ideas by linking Feanor and Celebrimbor through Tolkien's creation framework. Tolkien's legendarium and its many conflicts are often based around the spiritual gravity or path taken when creating within the created world. You may have heard of the term subcreation. Tolkien details this in various letters and tells us the following. We differ entirely about the nature of the relation of subcreation to creation. I should have said that liberation from the channels the creator is known to have used already is the fundamental function of subcreation, a tribute to the infinity of his potential variety. An easy to understand act of subcreation would be that of the Ainur themselves. They took part in the making of the world as sub-creators to various degrees. They interpreted according to their powers and completed in detail the design propounded to them by Eru. Those who had played the greatest subcreative or artistic role wished to incarnate themselves in physical forms when the physical world came to be. To fulfill the design that was put forward by Eru is to build upon his creation, to become an artist with what has been made by the true creator. Subcreation can, of course, lead to a fall. An example of this is the act of becoming possessive, clinging to the things made as its own. The subcreator wishes to be the Lord and God of his private creation, even rebelling against the laws of Eru. The fall of the elves, for example, is represented as a fall into possessiveness and to a lesser degree the perversion of their art to power. Subcreation then exists as a path itself, a path that honours creation and one that honours only the individual. And another form of creation exists in the physical world, counterfeit creation or making. Melkor is a prime example of one who is a strong proponent of counterfeit creation, making creatures from certain creatures that were pre-existing creatures. I can summarise both by saying that subcreation is involved in the process of creating gifts, and what is created participates in the world as it is, with freedom preserved and beauty shared. Counterfeit creation is involved in the process of domination, with a private will imposed on the world. It is concerned with control, possessiveness, and enslavement. This potential for a fall, and the potential to add to the glory of creation itself, or just one's own self, is why there is spiritual gravity associated with the act of creating. Will this thing I create be a gift, or a grasp for something greater that will benefit me? This is the trial that both Feanor and Celebrimbor face, and the different outcomes explain those differences between the Silmarils and the rings. Incorporating subcreation and counterfeit creation into the greatest works of both figures, let's summarise the fall of Feanor and Celebrimbor's act of renunciation. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of Varda, and yet, as were they indeed living things, they rejoiced in light, and received it and gave it back in hues more marvellous than before. The objects themselves are not at fault. They are objects of supreme beauty. They are even hallowed by the Vala Varda, meaning they contain not only light, but sanctified light, holy light. Yet they now exist as objects that cannot be unmade without loss. The fall, however, is about Feanor's relationship with what he has made. As I have said, he binds his very identity to what he has made. He refuses to share them with any outside his immediate family. He grows in anger at the idea of releasing them, even to bring life back to the two trees of Valinor. His love has curved inward and has become possession. From possession comes jealousy. None may touch them, and none may look upon them. From jealousy comes the oath of Feanor, an act that binds Feanor and his sons to his will, an oath of vengeance sworn in the name of Eru, with Manwë and Varda called upon as witnesses. From the oath comes exile, with Feanor leading many elves away from the Valar, Valinor, and even their own kin. And the exile leads to kin-slaying, the domination of what he has created leading to violence. In Feanor's case, what he created becomes his master. He is slave to what he has made, and with the Silmarils governing their own maker, they have become a counterfeit mode of creation through the will and deeds of Feanor. The chief power of all the rings alike was the prevention or slowing of decay, i.e. change viewed as a regrettable thing, the preservation of what is desired or loved, or its semblance. This is more or less an elvish motive. The Great Rings began with a noble desire to heal and preserve, yet are imperilled by the loneliness of the elves in the ever-changing world of Middle-earth, with the grief of memory and a yearning to keep loss at bay. There is a subtle danger to the Great Rings in that preservation itself can transition to a denial of change, which itself is a form of control. But the morality of Celebrimbor does shine through, in that he recognises that craft must be bound. He forges the three alone and he gives them away. Nenya to Galadriel, Vilya and Narya to Gil-galad, later to Elrond, Círdan and Gandalf. The fundamental difference here is that Celebrimbor's deeds and will do not bind these rings to himself. It is a stark contrast to the Silmarils. Celebrimbor remains the maker and master because he chooses limitation, stewardship and gifts. But as I will discuss throughout the series, the tragedy enters when it is discovered that the three rings are ontologically tied to the one ring of Sauron, meaning their fate is not their own, and the beauty they allow to endure can only endure if the one ring endures, and if the will of Sauron does not dominate them. This tells us of the peril of subcreation. Even the noblest creation cannot escape the web of power that surrounds it. Celebrimbor's legacy is that he has subcreated what I'd call a righteous craft, but it is still vulnerable. A pure and honest creation is still a danger. A noble intention can be corrupted in a fallen world. Perfection cannot exist in Second Age Middle-earth. I can summarise each maker, their artifact, and the spiritual outcome related to subcreation, counterfeit creation. Feanor's artifact governs the maker himself. The identity of the maker is fused with the object, and the outcome is love collapsing into possession and great ruin. Celebrimbor's artifact was governed by the maker, with the maker able to restrict himself and then relinquish the artifact. Creation becomes stewardship and healing. Tolkien has dramatically illustrated the pitfalls of creation through Feanor's attempt to possess beauty itself, ultimately leading to his downfall, while Celebrimbor attempts to preserve beauty, leading to it being saved, yet temporarily, as this is still not in line with the natural order. This leads to a tragic and beautiful conclusion. The three rings preserve what is fading, but they cannot stop fading. Their beauty is borrowed from creation and is not owned. They will exist for a time and pass as all other things must. Thematically, Feanor and Celebrimbor share a similar vocation and trial, yet their differing choices lead to distinct consequences. The flame of Feanor becomes a light of preservation through Celebrimbor. I see Celebrimbor as representing the possibility that an act of great subcreation need not destroy the maker, but that the world is marred and not yet healed enough for the hope of the maker to endure forever. It's about time a third and extremely important figure is introduced into the discussion of Feanor and Celebrimbor. Having already discussed Annatar's arrival and how Eregion forged the Rings of Power, I'd like to focus on Celebrimbor's reaction to Annatar, the reasons we should sympathise with Celebrimbor, and again stress the importance of what the three rings symbolise. A core idea I have hopefully shared in that previous discussion of Annatar is that he succeeded in Eregion because he did not tempt with evil, or anything that would resemble a dangerous path for Celebrimbor and the elves. Annatar approached Celebrimbor and the elves with ideas that aligned with their noble aims, a deeper, more perfected form of good. It is a shared aspiration that is twisted by a hidden will to dominate. I perceive that you love this Middle-earth, as do I. Is it not then our task to labour together for its enrichment, and for the raising of all the elven kindreds that wander here untaught, to the height of that power and knowledge which those have who are beyond the sea? The Lord of Gifts arrived offering instruction in lore, techniques beyond the current skill of the Noldor, and arcane theories of how art itself may resist decay. He was received in Eregion with open admiration, as Eregion itself was founded on the idea of renewal. Annatar did not promise power. He did not promise control, despite the Rings of Power providing it. Annatar offered restoration, a far nobler aim. The rejection of Gil-galad and Elrond, and Galadriel in some traditions, is due to their lack of artistic longing shared by Celebrimbor and the Myrdain. Their skepticism is based on spirit, not craft. The elves of Eregion suffer from the wound of memory, of things once beautiful that are now lost, or at risk of being lost. As the world changes, they lack the will to stop it, and feel grief at its fading, leading to a pure motive to preserve what is loved. It is through Annatar that the elves of Eregion see beauty as something that can be held, time can be tended, memory can be stabilised, the wounds of the first age can be healed. This is the temptation of subcreation pushed too far. The desire to preserve becomes the desire to fix the world, and this benefit for all becomes the desire to control outcomes. As with many great falls, it begins in virtue. This tells me that Feanor's own catastrophe was internal. Feanor did not need a tempter. His downfall was the love of the Maker towards his own creation. The Silmarils were a craft configured toward possession, and that was seemingly enough. I'd say his tragedy is an indigenous one, born within his own flame. Celebrimbor's trial is instructive and external. He is taught and is persuaded by a shared purpose. His temptation is that beauty should not be owned or used to glorify oneself. Beauty can be saved, and this will heal the world. Celebrimbor's actions matter so much, as this is possibly the most dangerous moral terrain in Tolkien's legendarium. Good aims pursued by means of hidden domination. The three rings then represent a great tragedy. Celebrimbor not breaking from the tradition of Feanor. Instead, he seemingly shows the redemptive possibility within it. Yet they are still tied to the Master Ring. Pure making cannot endure in Middle-earth's Second Age. The good ends remain vulnerable to corruption when the structure of power in the world is still bent. Again, the tragedy of Celebrimbor is that he saw the good that might have been, and he came closer than any other elf to achieving this. It was the world that could not support unbroken subcreation. This is something discussed in greater detail when I focus on the three rings themselves in this series. But the elves were not so lightly to be caught. As soon as Sauron set the one ring upon his finger, they were aware of him, and they knew him, and perceived that he would be master of them, and of all that they wrought. In anger and fear, the elves removed their rings. Sauron, finding that he was betrayed, and that he did not deceive the elves, came against them in wrath with open war. Sauron demanded the return of all rings of power. The elven smiths could not have attained to their making without his lore and counsel. Instead, the elves hid from him and bore the three rings away. This is the descent of an ideological dispute into open war, in the War of the Elves and Sauron. Approaching this war from the point of view of Sauron, I do not see this war as one of conquest only. Sauron truly believes that the elves are misusing power that by right belongs to him. He seeks to correct this. In a realm founded to return to a land of beauty with memory preserved, and a city standing as a sign of renewal, Sauron strikes swiftly and puts an end to houses of craft and memory. In the sack of Eregion, Ostinethiel is ruined, elven wards fall, libraries, guild halls and forges will all be annihilated. There is grief in the death and suffering of those slain, and a grief for all that has been built and is lost once again. There is no greater symbol of the tragedy of Celebrimbor and his noble motives than the destruction of Ostinethiel and the ruin of Eregion. Now, Celebrimbor was not corrupted in heart or faith, but had accepted Sauron as what he posed to be, and when at length he discovered the existence of the One Ring, he revolted against Sauron, and went to Lorinand to take counsel once more with Galadriel. They should have destroyed all the rings of power at this time, but they failed to find the strength. Galadriel counselled him that the three rings of the elves should be hidden, never used, and dispersed, far from Eregion, where Sauron believed them to be. Sauron's disguise fell when he discovered the revolt and repentance of Celebrimbor. He arrived with his force in Eregion for its destruction and to hold Celebrimbor to account. We see this with Celebrimbor being taken alive, being taken captive after a brave stand on the steps of the great door of the Myrdain. Sauron then puts Celebrimbor to torment after learning the location of the 9 great rings. He then learns the location of the 7 great rings, but not the 3. Sauron desires knowledge. He wants the 3 rings, because they are uncontaminated expressions of elven craft. They are the one work of this entire project of his that eludes his domination. Yes, they are subject to the One, but he did not touch them. He was not present in their making. They are a result of the skill and will of Celebrimbor. They existed without his approval or knowledge. He must have them. This is the final trial of Celebrimbor. Will he yield his creations to a will of domination? It is the hinge moment of his entire character. Then Celebrimbor was put to torment, and Sauron learned from him where the seven were bestowed. This Celebrimbor revealed, because neither the seven nor the nine did he value as he valued the three. The seven and the nine were made with Sauron's aid, whereas the three were made by Celebrimbor alone, with a different power and purpose. If Celebrimbor's life was a test of his grandfather's fire, this moment is its final trial. Celebrimbor passes his own test. His refusal to yield the three to Sauron was not out of pride, defiance, stubbornness, or possessiveness. Celebrimbor's refusal is his stewardship, I've previously discussed, being carried to its finale. If I understand Celebrimbor in these final moments, he understands that Sauron's obtaining the three leads healing to become domination, preservation to stasis, and memory to enslavement. The three are the last possible chance of beauty without tyranny, the last refuge for elves in a changing world. To surrender them to this tyrant is to surrender the entire meaning of his craft, of his art. In black anger he turned back to battle, and bearing as a banner Celebrimbor's body hung upon a pole, shot through with orc arrows, he turned upon the forces of Elrond. Celebrimbor chooses death, what I see as a martyr's death, as he died for an idea. Celebrimbor died for what the world might yet become through what he had made, not for the objects themselves. With Sauron torturing, killing, and displaying the body of Celebrimbor in mockery, it is a cruel, symbolic death. Sauron declares victory over the ideology of subcreation, with Celebrimbor's broken body becoming a sign of failed resistance. Yet Celebrimbor dies with a victory over Sauron. The three are safe, and stewardship endures. It is martyrdom in the classical sense, death to safeguard the conditions of hope. With Celebrimbor's death comes the end of the second attempt at Noldoran's subcreation, where Tirion was the dream of creating beauty, and Formenos the dream of keeping beauty. Eregion was the dream of healing beauty. All three fall. I have traced Celebrimbor's life as one of inheritance, divergence, trial, and an eventual sacrifice. So once again, what does any of this mean for me to call Celebrimbor the heir of Feanor? I'd like to summarise and conclude all I've discussed. Celebrimbor's heirship is a vocation, a calling, the calling of the Maker. He inherited the fire of genius and an Noldoran impulse to shape beauty into form. He has the desire within him to preserve against decay. Where Feanor turned his love of beauty inward into possession, Celebrimbor opened his love of beauty outward towards stewardship and relinquishment. With Annatar's teachings, Tolkien reveals a most dangerous moral terrain, where good ends can be corrupted by the means used to pursue them. The three rings then become an acceptance of Celebrimbor's inheritance, a purification of his inheritance. Tolkien choosing to make Celebrimbor a Fëanorian allows Celebrimbor to be an excellent craftsman and the one who attempts to redeem the brilliance of Feanor himself. Eregion becomes a reborn and corrected Formenos. This one genealogical change would bind a First Age tragedy to a Second Age tragedy, made all the more powerful by having Celebrimbor be directly linked to Feanor through art. In my discussion of subcreation, I'm suggesting that a genius of subcreation is not inherently sinful. It must be one of great discipline, limited for the good of many, rather than the individual. Tolkien has carried this idea through a lineage, with Feanor representing a subcreative fire that is unchecked and eventually tempered through Celebrimbor. The sin of Feanor is addressed through the growth and maturity of the grandson. The structural symmetry of Tolkien's First and Second Ages can be shown. The First Age is one of the temptations of possessing beauty through the Silmarils, with a refusal to yield that beauty leading to destruction. The Second Age has temptation of domination via preservation, through the trial of the Rings of Power.
This is resolved through voluntary limitation and stewardship. Both ages resolve their respective crises by recognizing that beauty cannot be held and that craft must exist within time. It does not exist outside of it or above it. The end of the rings becomes the completion of the elven story of making or crafting. To show that Celebrimbor is the redeemed version of Fëanorian inheritance, I can summarize their lives and influences. We can see the full art of the Fëanorian fire across 2 ages. Both share genius, the creative flame and calling. Both die due to the influence of their creations. However, Feanor dies in his attempt to reclaim what he made for himself, whereas Celebrimbor dies refusing to surrender his creations to tyranny after having given them to others. This is a death born of possession compared to a death born of stewardship. Once again, a fire that consumes with a love turned inward compared to a fire that illuminates with a love turned outward. Feanor's flame devours and engulfs. Celebrimbor's warms and endures. Through my own interpretation of Celebrimbor as an heir of Feanor, I conclude that Tolkien again demonstrates that the ends do not justify the means in art or knowledge. The gift of subcreation is one of community and is non-possessive. It allows beauty to be something you can participate in, not own. Was Celebrimbor worthy of the legacy of Feanor? Yes, he reached first-stage brilliance as a redeemer. Celebrimbor took the flame that once consumed the world and made it a light that could preserve and heal, if only for a brief time. The golden memory of Lothlorien, the haven of Rivendell, and the inspirational quiet fire of Gandalf all stand upon the sacrifice of Celebrimbor. This is a story that shows the transfiguration of Feanor's flame. In the 3 elven rings and their light, I turn to Celebrimbor's rings, their crafting, their structure, their importance, and their fate at the end of the Third Age. I want to show my appreciation and thanks to everyone who continues to support the channel. A special thank you to Patricia, Dovid, Victus, Wavesailor, Moses Gunn, NCV 1993, Seraphim 38, Brandon, Lynn, and Alex of the Lord of the Rings channel. Thank you.